Hello and welcome to Arnie's Short Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Phantom Highway. The Isle of Wight is a quaint haven of rolling hills, charming villages, and coastal vistas. But hidden within its serene facade lies a stretch of road that the locals avoid, a winding, desolate highway cutting through dense woods known as Black Hollow Lane. Legends speak of ghostly apparitions that haunt the road, and many who travel it at night are never seen again. Holly Arnold, an investigative journalist with a penchant for the macabre, had heard of the disappearances. Stories whispered in hushed tones at local pubs told of spectral figures, flickering headlights, and cars vanishing into thin air. Eager to uncover the truth, Holly packed her gear, a camera, a voice recorder, and a flashlight, and drove to the Isle of Wight to explore the infamous highway. Chapter 1: The Descent into Black Hollow. Holly's car hummed softly as she drove toward Black Hollow Lane. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the landscape in shades of indigo and grey. Her GPS warned her about the stretch ahead. A marked road. Perfect, she thought. A thrill of anticipation coursed through her. The road narrowed as she entered the forest. The towering trees, gnarled and ancient, loomed like sentinels on either side, their branches entwining to form a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the woods themselves were alive, watching. Her headlights caught glimpses of movement, a flash of white here, a shadow darting there. Probably animals, she reassured herself, though her fingers tightened on the wheel. Chapter 2: The First Encounter. It was just past midnight when Holly saw the figure. A man in a tattered coat stood in the center of the road, his back to her car. Holly slammed the brakes, the tires screeching. "Are you insane?" she muttered. "Do you need help?" Instead, he slowly turned his head, revealing hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. His face was gaunt, his skin ashen. A chill ran down her spine as he raised a bony hand and pointed down the road. "I'll leave now." His voice echoed unnaturally, as though it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Holly's instinct screamed at her to turn around, but curiosity overruled fear. She grabbed her camera and snapped a photo. When she looked back, the man was gone. Chapter 3: The Vanishing Car. Holly drove on, heart pounding. The road seemed endless, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. Her GPS screen flickered before displaying an ominous message, route unknown. Suddenly, she spotted taillights in the distance. Relieved to see another vehicle, she sped up to catch it. It was an old, rusted sedan, its rear bumper adorned with a faded sticker that read, "I hot suit the Isle of Wight." She honked, trying to get the driver's attention, but the car didn't respond. Instead, it veered sharply to the side and disappeared into the trees. Holly slammed on the brakes, staring in disbelief. There was no sound of a crash, no sign of the car, just empty woods. She stepped out of her vehicle, flashlight in hand, and approached the spot where the car had vanished. The ground was undisturbed, as though no car had ever been there. A faint whispering drifted through the trees, growing louder. Holly whipped around, her flashlight beam catching fleeting glimpses of figures, faces pale and eyes vacant. Chapter 4: The Phantom Parade. The figures began to emerge from the shadows, forming a ghostly procession. Men, women, and children, all clad in clothes from different eras, walked silently toward her. Their faces bore the same expression, a mix of sorrow and longing. Holly stumbled back, her flashlight flickering. "Who are you?" she demanded. One woman stepped forward, her bridal gown stained with blood. Holly recognized her from an old photograph she'd seen in her research, Clara Weston, a bride who had died in a car crash on this very highway decades ago. "You shouldn't be here," Clara said. "The road claims all who linger." "Why? What's happening here?" Instead, she raised her hand, and the procession began to dissolve into mist. But their whispers remained, circling Holly like an invisible storm. Chapter 5: The Final Warning. Holly ran back to her car, her breath shallow and ragged. The dashboard lights flickered, and the engine sputtered before roaring to life. She hit the gas, desperate to escape. As she sped down the road, the whispering followed, growing louder until it was a deafening roar. Her rearview mirror showed nothing but darkness, yet she felt the weight of unseen eyes on her. Just as she thought she'd never escape, the road ended abruptly. Her car burst through the tree line onto an open field, the highway behind her vanishing into thin air. Holly stopped and stepped out, trembling. The whispers were gone, replaced by an eerie silence. She turned back to see the woods in the distance, shrouded in an unnatural fog. Her camera and recorder were intact, but when she checked her footage, the images were distorted, the audio filled with static. The only clear sound was a faint voice whispering, "Beware Black Hollow, Epilogue, the Legacy of the Highway." Holly published her story, but skeptics dismissed it as fiction. Yet locals began to avoid Black Hollow Lane altogether, the legend solidifying into grim truth. Holly couldn't shake the feeling that the highway wasn't done with her. Sometimes, late at night, she heard the whispers again, growing louder, as if calling her back. And she knew that one day she might not be able to resist. Chapter 6: The Pull of the Hollow. Months passed, but Black Hollow Lane haunted Holly's thoughts. Her nightmares were vivid and unrelenting, endless drives on a shadowy road, spectral figures blocking her path, and whispers that grew into screams. Each morning she woke drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. Her story gained traction among paranormal enthusiasts, but Holly herself was unsatisfied. She felt as though she had only scratched the surface of the highway's secrets. Against her better judgment, she began planning a return trip. "It's foolish," she muttered to herself one evening. But it's not over, not yet. Chapter 7. On a chilly November night, Holly packed her bag again, this time adding protective charms she picked up from a local mystic, a digital recorder, and extra batteries. She drove to Black Hollow Lane under a sliver of moonlight. The road felt different this time, as if it were alive and aware of her return. The air was colder, the trees darker. Her GPS refused to work, but she no longer needed it. The highway seemed to guide her, bending reality to pull her deeper. Half an hour into the drive, the whispers began again, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing mile. Holly gritted her teeth and pressed on, her camera rolling. Then she saw it, a glowing figure standing in the center of the road. This time, it wasn't the man from her first encounter, it was Clara Weston, the ghostly bride. Her blood-stained gun shimmered in the pale light, and her vacant eyes fixed on Holly. Holly stopped the car and stepped out, clutching her flashlight. "What do you want from me?" Clara didn't respond, but she raised her arm and pointed into the forest. "Ah?" Holly asked, her voice quaking. Clara nodded once before turning and gliding into the trees. Chapter 8: The Truth Revealed. Holly hesitated before following. The forest was impossibly dark, her flashlight barely penetrating the dense fog that clung to the ground. Clara moved effortlessly through the undergrowth, her figure glowing faintly. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing. In the center stood an ancient, crumbling chapel. Its stained glass windows were shattered, and ivy crept along the stone walls. Clara stopped and turned to Holly. "This is where I began," she said. Holly's heart raced. "What began here, the curse?" "Long ago, this was a place of refuge, but one fateful night, it became a place of betrayal. Among them was a young woman who was to be married the next morning. But the storm was no natural force, it was summoned by a vengeful spirit seeking retribution for a betrayal that had occurred on the same spot centuries earlier. The spirit had cursed the land, ensuring that anyone who crossed its boundaries would become trapped, their souls claimed by the highway. If the curse feeds on fear and on grief. And now, it is stronger than ever." Chapter 9. Clara turned to Holly. "You've seen the truth, and now you must choose, leave and never return, or stay and risk becoming one of us." The pull of the highway was strong, and she felt an inexplicable connection to the spirits trapped there. But she also felt a responsibility to warn others, to ensure no one else suffered the same fate. "I'll leave," she said, "but I'll make sure no one else comes here." "You go, then, but remember, the highway will always call to those who dare to listen." Chapter 10. Holly fled the forest, the whispers fading as she reached her car. She drove away without looking back, the chapel and the cursed highway disappearing into the darkness. In the weeks that followed, Holly wrote a series of articles and gave interviews urging the public to avoid Black Hollow Lane. But the road seemed to fight back. Her footage was corrupted, her recordings erased, and strange accidents plagued her attempts to share her story. Despite her warnings, thrill seekers and skeptics continued to seek out the highway, many of them disappearing just as the legends foretold. And Holly? She moved off the Isle of Wight, hoping to leave the curse behind. But even in her new home, she sometimes heard the faint, familiar whispers in the dead of night. She knew the highway would always be a part of her, waiting for the day she could no longer resist its call. The legend of Black Hollow lay indoors, whispered among locals and thrill seekers alike. And those brave or foolish enough to drive its desolate path know one thing for certain: once the highway claims you, it never truly lets you go. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.